So welcome everybody and thank you for joining us. As I mentioned, we actually have people from across Australia, Asia and the US joining us this morning. Hello to my fellow Victorian, Colin. Today, as you can see here, we have two speakers. We've got Chris, who will be interviewing Ben. Chris is our Executive General Manager of People and Process and also our mining industry lead. And Ben leads our capability area for advisory. Now, in terms of structure, we've got 20 minutes where they'll be presenting, and then we've got a 10-minute slot for those who can stay on afterwards for a Q&A session. And just before we start, a little bit of housekeeping. We have Michael with us, who'll give you a little wave. He'll be manning the Q&A section. You'll see that functionality at the top of your app. So without further ado, Chris and Ben, I hand over to you.
Thank you, Marilyn. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Great to see such a mix of attendees, including some of our competition. You're all welcome. A little bit about me. I am COSOL's EGM, as Marilyn said, for our people and process business, and I'm also the company's mining industry lead. I've been with COSOL for over 3.5 years, and I have a passion for asset health and predictive maintenance, working over the last 20 years across various organisations and serving many of the world's top asset-intensive businesses. I have Ben with me on the call, but I'd like to share a little bit about COSOL before we introduce him. For those of you who don't know COSOL, we're an end-to-end asset management organisation with over 25 years serving our customers across our 4 key industry segments: natural resources, energy and water, transport infrastructure, government and defence. We have over 380 professionals worldwide who have both worked with and for many of our customers. Our offices are located close to our target industries and their operations. Our headquarters are in Brisbane. We have major offices in Perth and Denver and regional offices in Mackay and the Hunter Valley. We are proud to partner with many of the top mining companies in the world, and more than 50% of the companies that we serve come from this industry. Today, we are lucky to have Ben Pryor, who leads our asset management advisory practice, talk about a particular area in which we are helping our customers and will walk us through that journey. Welcome, Ben.
Thanks, Chris. So as Chris said, I'm Ben Pryor. I lead COSOL's asset management advisory practice. My background's about 14 years in asset management. 9 of those were on operating sites, predominantly in reliability-related roles. And I've spent about 4 years since then in consulting. And I've worked with organisations and for organisations from some of our largest mining companies through to some single site operations and fairly different maturity levels between those as well. I've also worked in operations in Australia, the Philippines and Madagascar, and for clients across Australia, Africa and North America. So I have been fortunate to work with, like I mentioned, organisations at vastly different maturity levels. And I've also delivered quite a few asset management maturity assessments over the last few years. And I'd like to share some insights on those today.
Thanks, Ben. So, Ben, what are you hearing from our customers about asset management maturity, and where do our signature solutions sit inside that?
Thanks, Chris. So signature solutions, we've got all of COSOL's solutions up here on the slide at the moment. We're focused today on the advisory practice, so my team, and within that, one of our key capabilities is asset management maturity uplift. And the start of that uplift journey is a maturity assessment. So those maturity assessments are what we're focusing on today. So Chris, you asked, why invest in asset management maturity? There's a few things we're hearing from our customers. I think on the left and the right, we've got lifting throughput and recovery and also reducing costs and increasing efficiency. Those are pretty standard like targets within the mining industry. The one in the middle, why focus on asset management maturity and an assessment? Something I think is a struggle in the industry is getting investment in asset management and proving that ROI. So that's a great reason to do a maturity assessment, and as part of that, a value case for the improvement opportunities that come out the back end.
Thank you. So how do leaders know it's time to actually look at asset management maturity, and what are the signs?
Thanks, Chris. So everyone on the call can see it's a little bit of a wordy slide here, but we did that on purpose. I'd like to invite everyone to take a screenshot of this if you'd like to, so you can come back to some of these dot points later. I'll just touch on a few of the things. Reactive maintenance. it's unfortunately common throughout the mining industry for sites to be in a reactive maintenance cycle, having things like non-compliance to plan and frequent breakdowns and break-in work. Weak standards and structure, again, a few dot points there, but a few things like having a work management process that isn't followed or not having one documented at all. And the last one, poor data and systems. So not having the data to inform your business decisions.
Fantastic, thanks. So this is a quote from a customer of ours, but what does this statement mean for you?
I think, Chris, like what I see with a lot of our customers is everyone's working hard on site. It's not a question of working harder. It's more about like the continuity and having a plan and delivering on it, rather than having a shotgun approach and doing lots of little things at one time. It's about having that planned initiatives, making sure that you're tracking them and doing them from start to finish to get the results.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So can you describe the process and where do you start a journey like this?
Great question, Chris. Step one is work out why you're doing an assessment. What are your goals out of it? What are the areas you want to assess? And also having a structured toolkit. So there are a few free toolkits available on the market. The Institute of Asset Management has a self-assessment toolkit that's free to download, I believe. We developed ours kind of based on that and some ISO 55000 principles and a few decades in the industry. When we deliver these, our second step is submitting a request for information to our client. So that has quite a lot of different data in it, from CMMS data to standards and processes to like work management, meeting attendance records. And we use that to kind of pre-populate as much of that assessment toolkit as we can before we go to site, and also to form some hypotheses around improvement areas. That lets us, on the next step of going to site and doing the assessment, spend a lot more time with people. So we form these hypotheses in our desktop assessment, but then we go to site, we interact with the workforce through one-on-one interviews, through some workshops, and just through some observations as well. So sitting in those work management meetings, for example. And then towards the end of about a week on site, we've typically got a pretty good idea what that improvement roadmap is going to look like, which is the last step. But we do like to sit with our site stakeholders and make sure that we're seeing what they're seeing and discuss what the priorities are. We do have a ranking system from 1 to 5. So we assess what we call practices and outcomes, and I'll touch on that a bit more later. But the important thing to consider with this is that areas where you're ranking at a 1 aren't necessarily, addressing those isn't necessarily going to have the most impact on your business. So it's important to perform a wide assessment, but it's also important to not focus too much on the numbers and recognize that the reason for performing the assessment with this toolkit is just to structure your thinking and allow you to narrow in on areas that will deliver the most value for the business.
Thanks. So you've described the start and the process. What do you typically see as areas of improvement to assess inside many of the organisations that we are working with?
So we've got some stars on some of the areas that we typically see as like a first phase improvement plan. It's not for every site, but these are the ones that come up fairly often. And also, these boxes are the competency areas that we cover in our assessment toolkit. So you can see there, fairly common challenges through the industry are materials management, having the right spares on site and having them set up well in your CMMS, having a defect elimination process that works well, same for work and shutdown management, asset strategies and life cycle, again, things that come up fairly often.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ben. So we've worked with site, we've gathered the information, but how do we then present our findings and our recommendations?
So we typically have 3 deliverables when we do these. The first one is handing over that assessment toolkit. So I think that's really important, because if you're at the start of a maturity journey, it's really important to be able to reassess on roughly an annual basis for 2 reasons. One's to make sure that the work you've done in the last 12 months has added the value that you thought it would. And the second one is to make sure that the plan you originally developed still makes sense 12 months down the track. The second one is a PowerPoint summary. So I've got some slides there on on the right-hand side that are what you might see in an improvement. So the top one there's a bit of a roadmap, a visual roadmap of improvement initiatives with different phases in different colors. This example, we put 4 phases in. The second one there is some results. That's just some randomized results out of our toolkit. The third one explains like the 4 phases and the intentions behind them, and why you're starting with like the phase 1 and then moving on to phase 2 in a logical way. And there are some other kind of key things I wanted to cover here, or key considerations when you're doing a maturity assessment and things I've kind of learned through delivering these in the past. Number one, I already touched on earlier, it's using multiple sources of information. So it's not just doing a desktop assessment, and it's not just going to site and talking to people and observing. It's about combining the two. So really quantifying where the problems are through that data analytics, but also making sure that the data is telling you the full story. Second one is around using a structured toolkit. Like I said, if you're kind of shooting from the hip on this, you're not going to have the structured thinking to make sure that you're narrowing in on the most important areas. And like I said, you can download the Institute of Asset Management Self-Assessment Toolkit to start with that. It's a good starting point, but it isn't quite as deep in like specific mining industry areas. It's a bit more high level, but it is a great starting point. The third one is to assess both what you do and what you get from it. So also known as practices and outcomes. An example I like to give, a practice in hydrocarbon management might be training your workforce on greasing and oil sampling lubrication practices. And then an outcome is having like very few to no bearing failures due to lubrication issues. So is what you're doing working? Yeah, and are you getting the right outcomes? That diagram on the right-hand side with the 4 quadrants is a way I like to think of it. The top left represents, so we've got outcomes vertically and processes horizontally. If you're in that top left quadrant, it means that you don't have great practices and processes on site, but you're getting the outcomes, which means that what you're doing isn't ingrained into the workforce, and you've probably got some key personnel risk. And then the opposite of that is that you've got all these great processes that are written and documented, but people either don't know they exist, or they don't understand them, or they just don't follow them. And there's different actions that companies need to take depending on where they're sitting within that those quadrants. Lastly, create a prioritized roadmap. I mentioned this earlier. If you're using a shotgun approach and doing like little things and people aren't aligned, you typically don't see the results of having a very structured process to follow. And that's not saying you shouldn't review it and have like milestones and checkpoints where you make sure that what you're working on makes sense. But it is really important to have a plan. And the last one is the value case. I think one thing that's important to understand is if you're not going to get a return on investment, it's not worth doing. And that doesn't mean that that investment must be dollars immediately. Some of your initiatives might be enablers for other initiatives, but the initiatives need to make sense of the business. They need to be aligned with the business's priorities, and they need to deliver value.
And just a couple of quick things I wanted to, this is fantastic, and thanks for sharing. Obviously, there's a lot of detail that sits underneath this, but I'm curious about 2 particular areas. And knowing how you deliver these, obviously we work closely together. How important is it that we work with the teams on site and bring them along for the journey?
Yeah, really important, Chris. And that's also equally important if you're in a team in a corporate office and you're doing these maturity assessments and uplifts for the sites. It's really important to help them along that journey. Sorry, you got me on that last dot point there. Thank you. So when we do these, we typically co-deliver the improvement projects over multiple years. Sometimes that is just touch points checking in, and clients are actually delivering all the work themselves and just having a check-in process to see what's working. Sometimes we're working on some initiatives and the clients have taken some internally, and other vendors are working on other initiatives. And sometimes we're working on a larger package of work. But regardless, it's important that there is some governance over that process throughout delivery.
Yeah, I think the message that you're giving there, Ben, is that we are obviously very flexible to work with sites and their operations in many different areas. Could be budget constraints. It could be available, specialists to work on those particular initiatives, but that we are very flexible. But the important part, or the message that you're giving, is that it does need to be tracked and monitored in order to deliver the value that you've uncovered through the whole assessment process.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thanks very much. Okay, so at this point, we might move into some frequently asked questions, some of the questions that we get from our customers on site. Ben, we might start with the first one.
Thanks, Chris. So the first question usually for us is, can we do this in-house? Do we need to get an external provider in to do it? Absolutely, you can do it in-house. I think this will be the third time I've mentioned the IAM self-assessment toolkit. That's a great place to start. I would recommend spending some time kind of making that a bit more comprehensive before kicking off. But yeah, really good starting point. There's two questions I'd ask if you want to do it in-house. The first one is, do you have the time to commit to deliver this? We find it usually takes anywhere between 2 and 5 weeks, and usually kind of on the higher end of that by the time you've developed the roadmap and an improvement plan and done the value case, because that bit also does take a bit of time, estimating where you think the improvement's going to come from and then quantifying that value.
Just on that, what I've heard, obviously being part of the conversations, is some of the customers are really aware that they have issues, but they simply don't have the time to address them. And that's one of the common challenges that we're seeing.
Yeah, and Chris, the other part is it's having the time and the headspace to have that helicopter view of the organization and take a step back and look at what's working and what isn't. And it can also be useful to have an outsider's perspective because everyone that's embedded in an organization has a certain view of how things work and how they don't. So it can be useful to have a third party sometimes to kind of collate all of those kind of viewpoints and deliver something that's a bit balanced.
And I think also, to touch on that point a little bit, the experience that we've gleaned from doing these with different organizations in different environments really does allow us to add that sort of, broader view rather than being stuck in that particular site environment. So I think that's really valuable. Do you have any other questions at all?
I have one more FAQ. Last one. How do you quantify value and justify it? So once you've identified what you want to improve, how do you sell it to the business? So usually we approach this in one of two ways, and it depends entirely on the operation and site context, but it usually ties back to either increasing revenue, and that's usually through overall equipment effectiveness. So, increasing your throughput, increasing recovery in processing plants, and decreasing downtime, increasing availability and runtime. That's going to get more tons or ounces, depending on your industry, out the door and increase your revenue. And then the opposite of that is decreasing your spend. So that can be through things like reducing parts expenditure, making sure your maintenance strategies are best for business and you're not over maintaining. Same on labor, and reducing waste and inefficiency. And then there's always kind of the third consideration around risk. So that could be health and safety related. It could be statutory compliance. Yeah.
Thanks. That's a great response, Ben. Appreciate it. So I think that's it from the pre Q&A that we received. But over to you, Marilyn.
Yes, and there are no questions currently in the Q&A nor in the chat. So if anybody does have a question, please, now's your opportunity to do so. But while people are tapping away at their keyboards, we did discuss one a little bit earlier about a question that comes from folk who have already completed a maturity assessment. Would you like to elaborate on that FAQ and what your response is?
So we do get asked, is it worth engaging someone external if we've already done a maturity assessment, we've already got that improvement plan in place? obviously it's not worth engaging someone external to do another one. If you're already sure about what you want to do, you've got the budget in front of you and approved by the business, and you're delivering. The times it can be useful to have someone external come in, and like Chris mentioned, we're pretty flexible with this. It can either be touch points for project governance, someone to sanity check the direction, or it can be helping deliver some of the initiatives. So some of the things that typically come out and areas to focus on, we kind of touched on it earlier on that slide that had all of the competency areas on it. So it could be like building bombs in your CMMS. It could be developing whole of life asset strategies. It could be around budgeting. Yeah, we're very happy and willing to take on those packages of work that form part of the journey.
Great, excellent. Still no questions. So a webinar that stays within its promised time is always a good webinar. So Chris, I might hand it over to you to say some final words. And before we do, it's come to my attention that some of our guests may not have seen the slides. So we'll make sure we get this recording over to you so you can see all the slides that Ben was talking about and all the screenshots he was suggesting. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Marilyn. Look, firstly, I'd just like to say thank you to those that have taken the time to attend today. I know your time is valuable. Both Ben and I are on LinkedIn, and we both appreciate that 20 minutes is a really short time to discuss and explore a topic that is so complex. We would both love to expand on anything that you have found interesting today, and we'd be also happy to take you through a few case studies that we've developed from some of our recent projects. So please feel free to reach out to us, and thank you very much for giving us your time today.
And Chris, actually, Mark has given us a question.
Here we go.
So sorry, it's just come through. Sorry, Mark. All right. How do you make the case for training to uplift asset management in companies which are not considering themselves as training organisations?
I might ask for some, like a clarifying question there. Do you mean how do you justify that spend like internally, or to deliver that training internally, or engage someone external to do the training? What was it focused on?
Just justify, yes, justify internally, he says.
I think you have to tie it back to a problem that exists within the business. I think a lot of asset management professionals, like we understand like why to invest in asset management, and that it's better for operating time, it's better for health and safety. I found the best way to do that with like a company's leadership is to have a look at the business's annual plan. Like most businesses have a plan on a page and things they're working towards, and tying asset management initiatives back to one of those overall improvement initiatives that are aligned with the business's priorities is usually the way to do it. We've done it in the past by like having an analysis of like operating time, for example, and trending that over the long term, and having like some 6-month moving averages, for example, where you can see that it is trending down and that action is required to kind of stop that downward trend and get it trending upwards again. Same for recovery. It could be some of your health and safety KPIs. Yeah, it really depends on where the problems exist within the business and narrowing in on those.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I appreciate that response. And yeah, the thing I was aiming for was, you're talking about asset management uplift. What I've seen is that when training internally isn't invested in, then companies can go backwards because they are not addressing those crucial staff and skill, essentially just people moving on. So it's often important to make the case to continue the internal training, at least, even with that diminishing return. Internal training usually loses about 10-20% per cycle. But and I guess that's one good thing for COSOL to stay on top of, to say, do you need a refresher to stay where you are, even as a minimum?
Yes. Yeah, and it is something we typically see within businesses that are in that reactive maintenance cycle. It's just a misunderstanding of work management and like why to do it and why it's important. And I think like really good work management training organizations kind of tailor that training to different levels of the organization. So the reason that like a fitter is going to care about work management is very different to why the manager is. The manager's going to be focused on data and uptime, and the fitter's going to be focused on, enjoying their job and making sure that the defects they're identifying are actually getting fixed, and they're not just looking at the same thing over and over again without any action.
And I think also, Ben, it's just good practice to continually have the organisation aligned on the competencies and the frameworks that a training program does provide. Safety and the responsibility towards the fellow workers is also a big part of that. And we do see one area where the industry is struggling is around that loss of the experience, and maybe the training provides that sort of uplift. It also demonstrates to the individuals that the companies that provide those training frameworks actually care about the people that are on site and that are working for them.
Yeah, and it's actually something that's come up a few times in some recent maturity assessments. We look at having things like competency matrices for levels of the organization. So, what skill does everyone need to do their job? And if that's missing, it also makes it really hard to justify training. Because, if you have in that competency matrix, like people need work management training to do their job well, and that's a gap that's identified, it's much easier to justify.
Thanks, Ben. I'm getting a finish up here from Marilyn. Very polite. Thank you, everybody, so much today. I'm obviously more than happy to talk to you in more depth around that particular area. It's a passion of mine as well. But again, thank you, everybody, for joining. Marilyn, over to you for finalisation.
That's about it. Just thank you all, and we'll be in contact with this recording and those slides in case you weren't able to see them. Thank you all. Have a great Friday.
Thank you.